ॐ श्रीहरिं परमानन्दम् उपदेष्टारमीश्वरं व्यापकं सर्वलोकानां कारणं तं नमाम्यहम्. Friends, we are going to start a new treatise today. It is by Sri Shankaracharya, and the title is Aparokshanubhuti. Before we take up anything about the Aparokshanubhuti, we have to deal with it, of course. But as usual, let us think of the Anubandha Chatushtaya every time. And Anubandha Chatushtaya, let me start from Adhikari, who we are, what we should be to assimilate this teaching. I will start in a new fashion, starting with Swami Vivekananda's example. A tiny ant is crawling upon the railway line, and a giant engine comes on that railway line. That tiny ant crawls down to safety. Showing this picture, Swamiji is asking us, what is the difference between this ant and this giant engine? Engine is very big. Some people think reactivity, but where from that reactivity comes, they do not know. So that is not the final answer. Sometimes I used to say, there is consciousness in the ant which is not in the engine. But then one of my friends objected to this. He said, if Brahman is all pervading, there is consciousness in the engine also. So I had to modify my meaning. I will say in this name, the ant knows it is there. The engine does not know that I am here. So, in technical terms, I will say, I consciousness is not there in the engine. In the ant, there is I consciousness. In the engine, there is no I consciousness. That is the basic difference. And now, because of this I consciousness, its reaction is this reactivity. I don't want to die. I want to live forever. Though we cannot live forever, but this I consciousness is the basic difference. And because of which, some people say fear. All these are byproducts of the I consciousness. Whether it is reactivity, whether it is fear, I am there, so I don't want to die, I want to live. This basic characteristics of I consciousness, because of which the ant crawls down to safety. Now deliberately we took the example of the ant, because the difference is that engine is gigantic, ant is tiny. Now, animals are beings, living beings. We differentiate living beings from non-living only by this I consciousness. Now let us take another example. The biggest being with this I consciousness is in the animal kingdom, elephant. By size and by power, we may take lion. Now, if elephant and lion on one side and man on the other side, now tell me what is the difference? What is the difference between man, which is not so huge, either in size or in power, compared to elephant, which is huge, and lion, which has the maximum power? What is the difference? Please tell me. I will tell you, there are two differences, one depending upon the other. People will say discrimination, intellect, thousands of things. No, no, no. The basic difference is that man does not keep quiet. Man struggles. I will again quote Swami Vivekananda's definition. You can write down beautiful definition. A man is man so long as he struggles to rise above nature. And this nature is both external and internal. That is Swami Vivekananda's definition. A man is man so long as he struggles to rise above nature, and this nature is both external and internal. So the first sign of man is a struggle. And if you do not see any struggle, you have to say that that man is an animal or machine. So the difference of man, no, elephant or lion, do they struggle or not? No. They only struggle for living, nothing more. All their, if you call intelligence or whatever they have, is spent only in living, not dying. So they do all those activities. Sometimes if you go by intelligence, social activity, the social structure of ants is much superior than man. You do not go that way. There is that bird which builds a beautiful nest from which architects get ideas. But it is only for living, not dying. Now man is defined as struggle. Now Swamiji says man is man so long as he struggles. When he goes beyond the struggle, then he will have to be called a god, not man. And below the struggle is not a man. Now, why he struggles and what is the other qualification of man which distinguishes him from all other beings? There is an awareness in man of its incompleteness, imperfection, incompleteness, apurnata. And because of this incompleteness or apurnata, only he struggles. He struggles because he feels, I am not what I should be. And so he struggles to rise above nature. Nature is trying to suppress it. Nature does not only mean external. Swamiji says external and internal. External means body, internal means mind. That is also nature. But some people told me, we do not feel we are incomplete. I asked a question. I told you about that question. You might not reckon it as a joke. When people ask me or us, why you did not marry? I put a counter question, why did you marry? No other answer to this question except what Brihadaranyaka Upanishad has told us. A man feels he is incomplete, and that is why he marries. A woman feels she is incomplete, that is why she marries. It is what Brihadaranyaka Upanishad has told us. We are incomplete, so we try to earn money. We are incomplete, so we build a house. We are incomplete, so we build air-conditioned houses. We are incomplete, so we struggle and struggle and struggle. Some people, because they are incomplete, go on accumulating knowledge. I told you about the Narada of the Narad Bhakti Sutras. As a student, he went to Sanat Kumar and he was known as a veteran scholar. Sir, teach me. Sanat Kumar says, tell me what you know. If there is something less, I will teach you. Narada narrated all the possible vidyas of this world, stool, gross, subtle, from Dhanur Vidya up to dancing and music, from the gross vidyas up to snake charming vidyas, geology, mineralogy, everything. He said, but I do not know who am I. And that is why I suffer. Please take me beyond suffering. From this we understand that Narad was not like many of us. He did not want enjoyment in our sense. He went for knowledge. And the more knowledge he got, the more dissatisfaction he got in his life. The more atripti came to his life because external knowledge did not give him anything. Why struggle for knowledge? Because he feels he is incomplete without knowledge. So this feeling of incompleteness in man works in different directions. Some people go on accumulating money. Some people want to become bigger than other people in power and in position. Why? They are feeling they are incomplete. And this incompleteness makes them struggle in the world. Some people want to earn name and fame. Why? They are incomplete. They are not what they should be according to their own mind. Now, let them go on struggling. Till eternity, they will never become complete in this way. By changing the whole world, I do not become complete. I am what I am. A man marries a woman. By that marriage, nobody becomes complete. Then, then what is the way? Now, due to understanding which comes from this is not the only point. Why he feels incomplete and why he thinks by struggle he will become complete? Because by nature he is full. He has perfection as his real nature and he does not find it outside in his life. So he struggles. Now he is going to get perfection. So now you understood the difference between elephant and lion on one side and man on the other side is that man is aware of his incompleteness, and that is why man struggles to become complete by changing, by making changes in his worldly life. And this attempt fails always. He may go to heaven. That does not make him perfect. He'll have to come down. Nothing change in situation is what the man struggles for. And no change in the situation is going to man complete. But in course of evolution, in course of the real nature of man, which is Brahman, manifesting itself little more and more in man, there comes a time when man understands he can become perfect, he will become perfect by changing himself, not outside world. A man has perfection within, he has to manifest that perfection. This will happen by when the man makes changes in himself. What do you call him now? We have shown the difference between animal and man. Man is a thinking animal, man is a social animal. All those definitions are of no use. Man is an animal who feels he is incomplete and he struggles to remove it. But when he understands, when he feels that he has to change himself to become complete, what do you call him now? Man in general and this particular man. We shall call that man as the sadhaka. Sadhaka does not mean he is doing something abnormal and odd. Sadhaka is a man who has understood or felt, may not be explicitly, but he has felt it, that he has to make changes in himself and then he will become complete. So last time we talked about fulfillment of life, kritarthata, that comes when he becomes complete and he understands now what he has to change. Physical habits, mental habits, and consciousness he has to change. By changing physical and mental habits, he will not become complete. But that will enable him to struggle in the right direction by changing his consciousness. Today, what is man's consciousness? I am a living being. I am a jiva. I am a subject living in this world which is full of objects. Is that not our basic consciousness in everybody? I am a man, I am a woman, I am a sannyasi, I am a brahmachari, I am an engineer, I am a doctor. All these are secondary. Common in all men is that I am a jiva. And I am living in this world which is full of objects. This we call as subject-object consciousness. Consciousness which has a division of a subject and object. And that is not true. We have seen every time. That makes him, I am the body which changes every minute, every second. That makes him identified with his senses which change every second. That makes him identified with his mind which changes every second. So he cannot be the body, he cannot be the senses, he cannot be the mind. How he can be something changing? And even this I consciousness changes. I of a small child and I of an old man, there is nothing common here. So he has to change his consciousness. Another way to find that this I consciousness is wrong is that it is shifting continuously. Now I am the body, now I am the mind, now I am the I. We say my body. My body is not I body, my body. So the shifting I cannot be the real I. And in contrast, we see the Rishi's consciousness. That is the starting point in Vedanta. Unless you see or hear or read about a Rishi, about a perfected sage, no growth has come in life. No spiritual growth has come in life. Sometimes we hear, we read about Rama and Krishna and then we are wonderstruck. We read about the sages and we are wonderstruck. And then only this starts. Once I asked my Guruji, is it not true that unless one has spiritual receptivity, there is no use staying with a Mahapurush? He said, tell me, how without living with a Mahapurush the spiritual receptivity would come to you? Now we may live or we may not live, but we hear about him, we read about him, and then this struggle changes. His consciousness is true. What is his consciousness? One reality in the world. No separate I and you. No separate subject and object. One reality without a second. One consciousness without a second appears as I in everybody. Appears as object sometimes, appears as subject sometimes. If I can change my consciousness to become like the Rishi's consciousness, that is a sadhaka. A sadhaka has understood that I have to change. No, you may not have explicitly understood. But if you analyze any sadhana, whether it is bhakti or karma or yoga or jnana, you will find that he is struggling to change his consciousness. Sometimes you are unable to come to this point that I am I consciousness. So we have to change our physical habits, we have to change our mental habits to come to this point that I am the jiva. This I define as a sadhaka. A sadhaka is he. We may talk of so many things, Vivek, Vairagya and all that. We shall read. Shankaracharya himself will tell us that. But basically, a sadhaka is he who has understood that by creating changes in himself, he'll become perfect or complete. And within that changes, the root basic is that he has to change his I consciousness from a subject living in objects to one reality living in all subjects and all objects. Now, the second point, Prayojan. Now, Prayojan has already been included in this. Prayojan, while discussing sadhak, we are discussing Prayojan also. The only aim of life can be achievement of Purnatva. People think moksha is my aim. And by moksha, what they understand? Not to be compelled from taking another birth. This is a byproduct. If we become complete, why should we be born again? And with full knowledge, why should we not be born again? Both sides. So, moksha is a relative concept, though most of us take that as our aim. Purnatva is the goal of life. Now, what is the subject matter? Vishaya. There we'll have to deal with this subject matter of all Vedanta, they say, is the realization of our identity with Brahman. That may be. But there are different treatises. So the matter is dealt with in a different way, and that should be the subject matter of that book. So here we come across the name Aparoksha Anubhuti. And to understand the subject, to understand the title of the subject, we'll have to take a very different direction now. We will have to think about epistemology. What is epistemology? The science of knowledge. What is the meaning of knowledge? What are the means of our knowledge? What means we'll reach God? What means we'll reach our perfect state? What means we'll not reach there? This is the first topic which I am going to discuss today. Other connection is remaining sambandha, that we shall later. Unless we know the subject matter, we cannot think of the sambandha. And subject matter in general, I have told you, is to realize the identity between so-called Jiva and Brahma. That is the subject matter. But it is dealt with in a particular way, in a particular treatise. That is why the treatises are different. I'm not bothered by this nomenclature, Prakarana Granthas or that Granthas. This is a treatise given to us by a perfected man. And the name he has given is Aparoksha Anubhuti. To understand what is this Aparoksha, we have to think how we get knowledge. What are the means of knowledge? Every system, I'm not bothered about systems. Or Narayan Rajesh Kumar very much thinks of these systems. But the rishis tell us there are 6 means of by which we gather knowledge. I might have called it 7. Why? Because this number 6 has a 6a and 6b. Let me tell the names first. Pratyaksha Praman. Praman means of knowledge. What we call direct perception is the first and basic means of knowledge. What is direct perception? We shall next understand. We have some common concept of direct perception, Western, Eastern, everybody differs. But we know there is something called direct perception. Then there is, please note down the points. 6 names I am going to tell. Direct perception in Sanskrit Pratyaksha Praman. Then Sanskrit next name is Anumana Praman. In English, deductive logic. Anumana Praman. We see smoke on the hill. From that we derive there is fire on the hill. Deductive logic. The third is Upamana Praman. We see something we can't understand. Oh, it is like a cow. Then we understood it. So this is called Upamana Praman. Third means by which we gather knowledge. Fourth is called Arthapatti, inductive logic. Why they are differentiated in the Indian system? Because that is completely different. Let me give a common example which is given in the books. We see a man getting fatter and fatter, and we know that he does not eat in the daytime at all. We cannot deduce anything from this. But if we assume that he eats in the night, then we are able to explain the present phenomena. This is called inductive logic. This assumption of something to prove the existing fact is called inductive logic, and it is clearly shown difference in Indian philosophy, and it is called Arthapatti. Now, there is another beautiful Praman, only proposed, suggested by Mimamsa philosophy and accepted in the Vedanta. Other philosophies do not know about it. Please write down Anupalabdhi. Anupalabdhi Praman. How will you translate it in English? Not available is a Praman. Non-availability is a Praman. Example. I told you bring that pen from that table. You came back and said there is no pen on that table. This abhav also is a knowledge or not? Absence of the pen on table is a knowledge or not? And how do you know it? Because you did not perceive. That is the only means. Non-perception is the only means of knowing the absence of something. If it had been there, I would have seen these are afterthoughts. The moment you did not see, you are aware it is not there. And then the last pramand, sixth pramand, which I say 6A and 6B. And in Sanskrit, different names are there. Shabda Praman is what I will call it. The Nyaya and Vaisheshik call it Apta Vakya. In English, verbal testimony. It is clearly of two different types. Our education system, our reading, our listening to talks by the teachers, this is the main source of our knowledge. Other than our Pratyaksha Praman, have you gone to all the countries of the world? Have you gone to the Mars or Moon? But the teacher tells us Moon is like that, America it is like that, India is like that, and that gives us knowledge. We read in the books about botany, zoology, philosophy, religion, that becomes our knowledge. This is called Shabda Praman, 6A. What is 6B? Vedika Praman. When the Rishi tells us Tattvamasi is not describing any object, he is telling us about our real nature. And to know our real nature, there is no other means available to us, no other means. Now, first let us divide this into two groups. Keep this aside, verbal testimony 6B. Let us keep that aside. Now we are thinking of the six pramana. We divide them into two groups. Direct perception, one. All five other groups. And we can sum them up or generalize all the five by telling indirect knowledge. Direct knowledge and indirect knowledge, let us differentiate clearly. Why? This is the most important thing. Oh, Naren Rajesh Kaur. By Anuman, by all the other means of knowledge, suppose we come to know Brahma Satya Jagat Mithya, it does not affect our life. And that is a mistake which most of the Vedantins, so-called Vedantins are doing today. They may know as information, Brahma Satya Jagat Mithya. They may be intellectually convinced that Brahma Satya Jagat Mithya. It does not touch their life. Because the effect of Pratyaksha is much more stronger in our life than all the indirect perception. This, please remember the most important point in today's discussion. Out of the six pramanas, other than the Vedic testimony, the Pratyaksha Praman is what affects our life. No other Praman has the power. Now we see the world. Immediately the reality of the world shines in us. By any theory about world is being unreal, it does not change our life at all. And so, this so-called intellectual conviction is not enough, it does not touch our life. Have you understood? We divided into two classes, direct perception, indirect knowledge. Indirect means of knowledge. All the Anuman, Upaman, Arthapatti, Anupalabdhi, they are indirect means of, and verbal testimony, general, they are all indirect means of knowledge. Direct means of knowledge is Pratyaksha Praman. Now, our direct means of knowledge, I shall try to explain now the real idea, Vedantic idea, real idea about what constitutes direct perception, differentiating it from all other Indian philosophies and differentiating from all Western ideas. In Western idea and in Indian philosophy also, direct perception is that which we gain by our five senses. Now I put a question. I am happy or I am miserable. Can our Indriya show that? And am I not directly aware that I am happy? Am I used to some anuman? Because my face is like this, so I am happy. Or somebody will come and tell me you are happy. And the West will call subjective. Anything in the mind, they say subjective. Is it not direct? So Vedantic idea of perception, direct perception, differs from all other systems, mainly in this, that in the mind also. Now, so many functions of the mind, not only happiness and misery. I am feeling love for somebody. Somebody has to come and tell me, you are loving somebody. Am I not directly aware that I am loving somebody? I have hatred for somebody. From my actions, by anuman, you will judge that I am hatred or I am loving. But they are anuman. No, many times the cinema people or good actors and actresses, they will show as if they are loving somebody. In this society, I am telling you, I am not talking of cinema. Many people can imitate love and society may become misled. But the person knows he is not loving. So this love cannot be a matter of indirect perception. That will be delusion. Direct perception. I have given one example only to tell you that the present definition of direct perception is not complete. Now another thing. Our physical sciences and Indian systems up to Sankhya, they have a epistemology. And what is that? How we see an object. Let us take example from optics science. Same thing Sankhya will tell us. Or yoga, we found it in yoga. From that object, some rays are coming. I'll first ask a question. Has anybody seen rays in the world up till now? When we think we are seeing sun's rays, we are seeing the dust particles illumined by those rays. We can never see the rays. And something has come from the object and hit upon our eyes. We do not know it. Then the nerves are reacted. The nerves have carried that reaction within. Lot of biological and neurological science is there. That does not generate perception. It has reached our mind. Not brain, mind. Some people will say, mind has presented it to buddhi. Buddhi in the Shastras is I consciousness mind, both. And that buddhi reacts. And that reaction we call knowledge. What do we know? We only know the reaction of buddhi, we do not know what that thing is. Where is direct perception gone? Similarly, hearing, smelling, touching, everything. Something comes from outside, we do not know. Some reactions in the nerves, we do not know. By physics, you can touch and say electric pole, and that does not show the sensation being carried. And our mind or our buddhi reacts. So we are seeing the reaction of our own mind. Where is directness of perception? Now let me explain the Vedantic position of perception and find out. There is one consciousness in the world, not two. And we call that consciousness as Brahman, Atman, God, by whatever name you like. One consciousness. We have a psychophysical unit, body-mind complex. On this mind, that supreme or one consciousness falls or reflects or whatever you like to call it. Immediately it becomes bipolarized wave. Bipolarized. That means like a wave which has two ends. When the light of consciousness of Brahman falls on our mind, it becomes a bipolarized wave. And one pole is I consciousness. Now the other pole, the wave, can remain in the mind itself or go through one of our senses to outside objects. Suppose it remains in the mind itself. Now happiness, misery, love, hatred, can it not perceive directly? I know I am happy. This I is one pole of the wave, and happiness in the mind is another pole of the wave, and I am directly aware I am happy. This is the Vedantic definition, mind you. Here subjectivity is concerned, directness is explained. Now, normally what is happening, the wave goes to the mind. From the mind, it goes to one of my sense organs, and through that sense organ, it goes to the outside object. Through my eyes, it has gone, and it has fallen upon the pillar outside. What is my consciousness? Direct. I am seeing the pole. So directness of perception comes from Brahman, not from object. Brahman, consciousness, falling upon the mind. One side it gives rise to I. The other side, instead of remaining the mind, it has the wave. Waves, you see, the mental wave, we say it goes outside. It does not entirely go outside. Huh? One pole is fixed, I. And holding on to that pole, the other thing extends and goes to any object. Then I see the wall, I see you. If it goes through my nose, I smell this, I smell that. Direct perception. If it goes through my ears, I hear this. So direct perception in Vedanta is defined like this. Are we not sure of this now compared to any other explanation of direct perception? One thing is that mental is not separated into subjective. Second thing is that in the Western definition or in the definition of every Indian philosophy up to Sankhya, we are aware only of a reaction. We are not aware of the thing itself. But in this definition, we are directly aware of whatever happens in our mind and the wave going outside, falling upon any object, that corresponding perception. That means if it has gone through eyes or ears or touch or smell or taste, that is direct perception. Understood? And we take the other point now. The direct perception effect on our life cannot be cancelled by any other secondary indirect perception, indirect consciousness. You go on arguing Brahma Satya Jagan Mithya, it does not touch you. Now, we talk of the last means of knowledge. Rishi's sentence. If we take verbal testimony in general, including Rishis, if they are talking of some object of the world, it produces indirect knowledge in us. But if they are talking of our own real nature, the man of realization who directly knows what he is, talks to us about our real nature, it has the capacity to produce a direct knowledge. And this direct knowledge is much more strong than our ordinary direct knowledge. Now, we divided our perception into direct and indirect. And our direct perception again, little more analysis. In Germany came a philosopher, Immanuel Kant. And he told us what is our direct perception. It is known through Vedanta always, but in the modern world, Kant was the first man to propose it. He says our mind, the constituents of our mind are time, space, and causation. Our mind is made of time, space, and causation. And anything we know, direct or indirect, we know through the mind. Now to know a thing, he says, let alone God. Even the particle of a dust, you can never know its nature, real nature. Because the moment you go to know a dust particle, you throw your mind upon that. And whatever of that particle is caught by the mind, that much only you know. Even in your direct perceptions, you know only that much which is caught by your mind. Those who can understand a little projective geometry, I will give an example. There is a screen before us. And behind the screen, something is happening. And there is a focal light behind. So on the screen, we are able to see the shadows. A man walks towards us. On the screen, do we see him walking? What we see, the man is growing in size. This is called projective. As projected on the screen, we see things. Kant says similarly, as projected on our mind, we see things. How can we know the real nature of a thing? In between us and the thing, our mind and our senses, how do we know they are not distorting things? So this pratyaksha knowledge, now we understood, is not so much pratyaksha as we thought. Comparatively, it is pratyaksha. Comparatively, it is producing more or changing our life compared to all other indirect knowledges. But we have now found out that it is not that direct. Then, if the rishis tell us you are God, what happens? How to call that pratyaksha? We call it non-indirect. If we call it direct, we have found that direct itself is indirect. But it is not indirect. So we call it non-indirected. That is the name, please, aparoksha. Pratyaksha and apratyaksha, we say pratyaksha and paroksha, seen by somebody. Through some medium it has come to us. Through the medium of our mind and organs it has come to us. Our very definition of Vedanta pratyaksha also was like that. That the wave, one side is I, one side is in the mind, or through the organs it has gone outside. So through our mind and organs it has come to us. So much mediacy. Now, another thing here, I told you happiness and pleasure in the mind. Can we know it by our indriyas? Do we require our indriyas to know it? These are the two sides. We cannot know what is happening in our mind. You do all experiments by science. Only reactions you are seeing, the effects you are seeing. You are not seeing what is happening in the mind. So our indriyas cannot see what is happening in the mind, even with the help of infinite scientific gadgets. But the other side is, do we require indriyas to know what is happening in the mind? We are directly aware of what is happening in the mind. No, extend this. Something nearer to us even than the mind. Something nearer to us even than I consciousness. What is that? Our real nature. Our real nature, not your. Everybody's real nature, not the others. It is nearer to us than our I consciousness. I've shown you just now that I consciousness changes. A small baby's eye consciousness and old man's eye consciousness, no common thing. But behind all that, there is the one supreme consciousness which reflectively is making us eye consciousness of a child, eye consciousness of a grown-up man, eye consciousness of an old man on one side and giving us knowledge of the object on the other side. You are following, please? This consciousness is our real nature. Our mind cannot reach it because the reflection only is coming on the mind. Our eye consciousness cannot reach it because eye consciousness is a product of that reflection. Can we become aware of it directly? Directly, much more directly than the direct. And to name it, we say immediate awareness. Immediate does not mean time sense. Huh? Immediate we use for no gap of time, no gap of any medium, without any medium. How it know without any medium? I explained to you what is happening in the mind. Indriyas cannot know and indriyas are not required. What is happening in me, the real me, mind cannot reach there and mind is not required. Is mind required to know? Today, our perception is spoiled by our using the mind and the indriyas. If we can somehow stop this distortion, if we can give up our connection with the mind, if we give up our connection with indriyas and mind and eye consciousness also, we will become much more directly aware of our own real nature. This is aparoksha anubhuti. And that is why Shankar has named his book as Aparoksha Anubhuti. He will help us, he will lead us to gain knowledge direct, more direct of our own real nature. And so he calls it Aparoksha Anubhuti. Now the Vedantis will say, Aparoksha Anubhuti is not of the means, one of the means, no, it is the end result. What is the means? Verbal testimony of the sages. Verbal testimony of the sages, we shall discuss that later on. Verbal testimony of the sages goes through our ears. And if we are listening not by ears, if we are listening not by our buddhi, if we are listening by our heart, which is the only instrument of direct knowledge, then it produces changes in the heart. We are aware of ourselves. Where are we aware of ourselves? In the brain, in the hands. If you ask someone, will you do this work? He says, I will do this work. So it is in the heart that the I consciousness is functioning as a reflection. In the heart itself, the original light is there. It is not limited by the heart, but it is available to us in the heart. If we can see, if we can give up our connection with I, our connection with mind, our connection with Indriya, we will become more directly aware of what is in our real nature. That is aparokshanubhuti. How to get that is the subject matter of this book. I will end by telling one example. Swami Vivekananda asked Sri Ramakrishna on the very first meeting, Sir, have you seen God? He said, I am seeing him as directly as I see you. Then Swami Vivekananda is aware of Kant. And Sri Ramakrishna is much more aware of that. So this directly seeing you may not be direct. So Sri Ramakrishna says in the third sentence, but 1,000 times more clearly and brightly. 1,000 is only a word. 1,000 always represents infinity. Understand that? That is aparokshanubhuti. I see him. Yes, I am seeing him. I am seeing him as directly as I see you. That means no imagination. Direct perception compared to all other indirect perceptions. But the direct has been understood to be not really direct. But he says, I see him 1,000 times more clearly and brightly than I see him. That is aparokshanubhuti. And my child, there is a fourth sentence, who wants to know it. And then the fifth says, my child, if you do as I tell you, you will also see. So there are methods of realizing this, our own real nature, and that is aparokshanubhuti. Now what will be the result? That will cancel our so-called direct perception. The effect of direct perception cannot be called cancelled by any other indirect means of knowledge. How much logic you use, I am not this and I am not that. It is not changing your consciousness. But if we get the real direct perception, it will cancel the so-called direct perception. The effect of our feeling the world to be real will be smashed in 1 second when we are aware of our real knowledge in the immediate way. Immediate awareness or immediate consciousness is the name given in English to this aparokshanubhuti. Here in the book, he has named it as self-realization. That means we know what we are ourselves. That is self-realization. We are not knowing something in the mind. We are not knowing something in the world. We do not require mind. We do not require senses. We become immediately aware of what we are. So it is called self-realization. What is realization? Today it is an idea, but it becomes real to us. Self becomes real to us by immediate perception. That is the theme of this book. How to get it? Shankaracharya will teach us through this book. Om Shri Harim Paramanandam Upadeshtaram Ishwaram Vyapakam Sarvalokanam Karanam Tam Namamyam. We shall take up shlok by shlok from the next class, from the Friday. Hari Om Tat Sat. Em Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.